everyone, and welcome to the program. I'm Christiana Manpour in London. ISIS faces imminent defeat in both its Iraqi power base in Mosul and its base of operations in Raqqa, Syria. Coalition forces estimate that just a couple of hundred ISIS fighters remain in Mosul today, and in Raqqa, Syrian democratic forces are fighting their way into the heart of ISIS' self-proclaimed caliphate. But if the Islamic State loses its state, does that mean the end of ISIS? We've seen the group project terror across the world, from Tehran to San Bernardino and, of course, here in London. And later, our Ivan Watson takes us to a new frontier in the Philippines. But first to Mosul, where the destruction is staggering as people flee for their lives. Can the Iraqi government pick up the pieces properly this time? And what about Syria, where the Assad regime, its Russian and Iranian proxies, the US-led coalition, and the Syrian fighters it supports could all be jockeying for position after ISIS clears out? So what happens the day after ISIS is defeated? Karen von Hippel is Director General of the Royal United Services Institute. It's the world's oldest military think tank, located here in London. She was former Chief of Staff to General John Allen, who was President Obama's director of the anti-ISIS coalition. And I spoke to her about this earlier. Karen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
How would you describe, is it the end game? Is it even more than the end game? I mean, the fact that ISIS is trapped now in a very small part of Mosul.
Yes, I would say this is the last gasp of one phase of the counter-ISIL campaign. So Mosul and Raqqa were going to be the end game of the so-called caliphate, but that's not the end of ISIL. And so the concern about what ISIL 2.0 might look like and how we disrupt that, that's still to be determined.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's just very, very disheartening, isn't it? Because ISIL took Mosul in the summer of 2014. It's taken this long to go back against them. What do you mean 2.0? What do you think could happen?
Well, let's say there's two challenges. The challenges inside Iraq, governance in the longer term, but of course shorter term stabilization challenges. And then the longer term, where will these foreign fighters and others go? Even if Baghdadi is no longer with us, there will be other leaders that will try to direct attacks, make sure that the affiliates in many parts of the world are still strong and inspire others in many parts of the world to carry out attacks. Some of these people who carried out attacks were not members of ISIL, but they were inspired by ISIL. Others were directed by ISIL.
That's around the world you're talking about, whether it's San Bernardino or in Manchester.
Westminster.
Or Westminster, exactly.
Several layers of challenges. The fighting has been incredible for the last 8 months. It's been a huge challenge. Mosul was always going to be the last battle because it was going to be the hardest. But yeah, actually, the really difficult work is still to come.
In the last few days, the Prime Minister of Iraq has said that ISIL blowing up that historic Al-Nuri mosque there signifies their defeat. Maybe not their surrender, but their defeat. You disagree then? I
think it's really hard to say, will they cut and run or will they fight to the last man? And women, there might be some women in there too fighting. And it's just hard to say. The same in Raqqa and Syria. Mosul and Raqqa always had to happen around the same time so that if you squeezed one, they didn't appear in the other place, and they mostly have been able to keep to that schedule, but they each have their challenges.
So we were always told that if the caliphate is gone, that is the rationale for ISIS. Islamic State is gone. Yeah, they may pop up, we call it whack-a-mole, and we're going to have more reports from our Ivan Watson in the Philippines after the break. But can they actually metastasize as ISIS, or does it have to be something else? They have no more caliphate.
Yeah, it's hard to say, right? Because Al-Qaeda did not have a caliphate.
But it never claimed to have one.
They never claimed they didn't want one, and that was part of the reason the two split when they did. And it's probably part of the reason why ISIL was so appealing. I mean, don't forget, we had 1,000 to 2,000 people traveling out to the region in 2015 and 2016. Al-Qaeda never had such high numbers of volunteers. Not all were going to fight, as you know. And so it really is a different appeal. But I'm not sure if it's a so-called caliphate or if it's the extreme violence or if it's just a really savvy communications strategy. It's not really clear to me why it has been so popular.
It has been said that the United States, and you worked for General Allen, who was directing the anti-ISIL coalition, that since 9/11, one of the criticisms of the U.S. is that its wars have been all about tactics and not about strategy. They've been, to try to defeat the so-called terrorist bad guys, but it hasn't brought up a new political framework to advance some kind of post-terrorist world in those two countries.
Yeah, I mean, I would say U.S. foreign policy can be partially to blame, especially the invasion of Iraq. ISIL really grew out of al-Qaeda in Iraq, and it was allowed to fester because many countries dropped the ball in Iraq on pressuring them to make the necessary political reforms. But I don't think it's just lack of U.S. foreign policy or lack of a proper counterterrorism strategy. I think these groups would have existed
it's a strategy. Counterterrorism is different from actually a strategy which includes the politics. So the politics on the ground, what hope do you see for the politics on the ground in the Iraqi political system, in the Afghan political system?
It won't be resolved overnight, and it not only requires brave political leaders, but an ability to balance countervailing forces. In the case of Iraq, obviously it's Iran versus the U.S. and other countries. But it's also the case that these groups have been around for decades, and they will be with us in the future. The challenge is to make them not such a threat that they are today.
And how does one do that?
I don't think we're on top of that yet. There is much more needs to be done on the soft side and the hard side.
So you can't fight your way out of it. You can't drone and bomb and
right. And that's understood by most
But is it working?
Leaders.
You say it's understood.
It's understood, but there isn't really a very good strategy right now to do that. There is this U.S. coalition that the Brits and others are part of, and that strategy is fairly comprehensive, but it really has been focused mostly on Iraq and Syria. It hasn't tried to address the out-of-area threats. And partially this was because they were worried that they would lose focus on Iraq and Syria if they started focusing on the Philippines and Afghanistan and Yemen and these other places where ISIL groups have declared themselves.
Do you have confidence in the current White House and its military and national security and counterterrorism infrastructure to get this job done?
Yeah, good question, because we don't really know what Donald Trump's foreign policy is on anything yet. Do you remember he said within 30 days there will be a new ISIL strategy? I haven't seen that. I don't know what his strategy is on Syria, much less on Russia, much less on the U.S. place in the world. So I don't think we're there yet.
Karen Von Hippel, thank you so much.
Thank you.